Let me tell my story a little bit for those who don't know it. And that my life changed, like so many people's lives on 9/11, but mine changed in ways I didn't expect and I couldn't have predicted. I don't think anyone could have predicted. I've summed it up this way in articles I've written or talked about in the media that September 10th, 2001, I went to sleep a white guy. On September 11th, I woke up an Arab. While that's overly simplistic, it really is the essence of my life. Pre-9/11, I was essentially treated as a white person. I was white Dean. People didn't refer to me as Arab American. After 9/11, not right away, but in the years that followed, I became minority Dean. And I'm not alone in that experience. In fact, I wrote an article this week for CNN earlier in the week on this very point in my own trajectory, and other Arab Americans emailed me and said they went through a similar metamorphosis. And I know that because I've talked to people over the years. For Arab Americans born in America, raised here, essentially thought they were just part of the mainstream society. And then 9/11 happened. We found out that our white card could be revoked and was revoked. And I'm truly the living example of the expression, I'm sure you've heard it, race is a social construct. The idea of race is a social construct, meaning it's not biological in America. It is more based on society. In that myself and many in my community were treated differently after 9/11. Our skin color didn't change. Our names didn't change. Everything around us changed. People changed. The way they viewed us was different. The way they talked about us. We had become part of a minority community, and not just any minority community. In the years after 9/11, we were viewed as part of a community that many Americans at what ranged from not knowing much about to being suspicious to actually hating us. And as soon as right-wing politicians saw there was an opportunity to score political points by demonizing us, they did that, of course. And just so it's clear, when I mention this idea that pre-September 11th I was a white guy, it's not like I didn't know I was of Arab heritage. My dad's an immigrant. He had an accent. My cousins would come over. But those were the only Arabs I really knew. My family and my dad. My mom's Italian. I was raised in Lodi, New Jersey, which I've talked about. That there were two ethnic groups in Lodi when I grew up. You were either Italian or you were my dad. That was it. I even brought my father to show and tell. I'm not even kidding you. They were just amazed at this non-Italian immigrant. He came into school and just talked about being an immigrant to America, not being Italian, being of Arab heritage, being Muslim. And I was raised in a multi-religious, multi-racial home. My mom being Italian, the daughter of immigrants, and my dad being a Palestinian Muslim immigrant himself. My mom's Catholic. So I was raised with both faiths. And my mom was born here, so she understood America much more than my dad, who came here in the mid-50s. My dad wanted to name me Salahuddin. And let's be honest, if my name was Salahuddin Obeidallah, my life would have been vastly different. That simple little thing, just a different first name. Sure, I could have shortened it like my cousin Salahuddin to Dean in discussing it with people, but on all my documents, my birth certificate, driver's license, in school growing up, my life would have been Salahuddin. And I don't know how it would have been, but I know vastly different than the life I went through, because my mom understood how difficult it would be, because she saw her immigrant parents trying to navigate America. And so I was raised Dean Obeidallah. Very ethnic background. Last name has the word Allah in it. It means servant of God. But when you hear Dean and you see me, I look like an ethnic white person, like Italian or Greek. Even though Palestinians are light-skinned, my cousins, many of them are my skin color. Some are much darker. And so that was my life pre-9/11. I've often joked all my friends pre-9/11 had names like Monica and Joey and Chandler. But then 9/11 happened, and America changed. America changed around me, around my entire community. Things that we had not heard before from the levels of candidates running for office or even elected officials was brand new. It wasn't like life was perfect pre 9/11. It wasn't like a bed of roses for people who really looked Middle Eastern. And there's a great book by a man named Dr. Jack Shaheen called Real Bad Arabs, Reel, as in movie reel. And he looked at movies from the mid-70s to 2001, right before 9/11. Over 300 films showed Arabs or Muslims in a negative light, as terrorists, as devious oil sheiks, that kind of stuff. So it was already, we were already marinating in this idea of don't trust us, don't like us. There was very few of any positive Arab representation. And just so it's clear for everyone, Arab and Muslim don't mean the same thing. Arab is an ethnicity. You can be Arab in any religion. I have Arab Jewish friends, Arab Buddhist friends, Arab atheist friends, and of course Arab Christian and Muslim as well. Muslim is a faith. You can be any race or any background whatsoever. There's white Muslims. African American Muslims are a third of our community, so it's very diverse, the Muslim community, in that way. So we get to this world, 9/11 happens. I'm there on 8th Street and 6th Avenue in Lower Manhattan watching the second tower collapse. I knew America would change. I couldn't predict what would happen to me. There was no way if anyone said, hey, Dean, this attack just happened, and because of it, you're going to actually become in touch with your Arab heritage and more embrace your Islamic faith. I would have been like, you're out of your mind. That makes no sense. Why would I do that? But that's what happened. And a lot of it happened in response to the attacks on my community. A community that I was really not part of. So when I say my community, it is now I'm part of it, but I was not before. I was not involved in Arab American organizations. I was raised both Christian and Muslim, so I was sort of between faiths, probably more identifying as Christian at that point, just by default. And then in the years that followed, I became active in Arab American organizations, more pursuing and learning more about Islam and being more in touch with that part of my background and that faith, now identify as a Muslim. But that took some years after 9/11. And little by little, making Arab friends. Some were Muslim, some were Christian, whatever they were, but they just becoming part of this community, going to the Middle East. I had never been to the Middle East before 9/11. After 9/11, the years that followed, I've been there countless times to go visit family, to do comedy over the years, from everywhere from Egypt through Dubai, you name it, and everywhere in between. But clearly, and honestly, I was at first reluctant to lose my whiteness because I had no idea what it would be like to be a minority in America, but I instinctively understood it would not be easy. I knew it would be more challenging. But I went from the reluctant minority to the proud and unapologetic one, and that's where I've stood now for years. But in that transition, I learned firsthand what white privilege is. People talk about white privilege. What is this term? It's real. I know it. I lost a lot of it. That's why I can tell you it's real. And I'll give you examples that apply to me and many in my community. White people, you are never called out to answer for the worst in your community. No one after the Oklahoma City bombing wanted to know, why did white people do this? What's wrong with white people? That didn't happen. After January 6th, we don't hear people going, what's wrong with white people? But for minorities, we are all called out to answer for the worst in our community. And we all understand that if we don't push back against the grotesque caricature that those on the right generally want to paint of us, that will become everyone's view of us. And for my community, it was not just demonizing Arabs and Muslims and painting us as dangerous, as potential terrorists. It was then enacting laws to do that. And politicians openly demonizing us. There are no politicians traveling the country running for office that are demonizing white people as a group, going through the sins of white people through time. That doesn't happen. That's part of white privilege. You might say, well, that's the way it should be for everyone. Yes, it's absolutely true. I'm not advocating for people to travel the country demonizing white people or using the worst examples of white people to define all of you. No, I just don't want you to do that to any minority either, because that's what we go through. So in the post 9/11 world, as I became a minority, and went through this, where there was demonization of my community, hate crimes against my community, our places of worship attacked, death threats against me and vastly so many others in our community, politicians demonizing us, discrimination against our community, people I know, family members, simply for being Arab or Muslim. Pre 9/11, I was liberal and progressive, and I certainly would stand up for minorities if I heard about similar events towards them. But it was more intellectual. Like, discrimination's wrong. You have to stand up against it. Post 9/11, after what I went through, it was no longer intellectual. It was visceral. I went through it. So I knew the pain when people like Trump and other Republicans demonize any minority or discriminate against them and gin up hate of them, because I have felt that. I have felt that sting and that pain. And it is frustrating, it is infuriating, it is aggravating. It feels like it's never going to end. But I will say, I think in the years, especially with leading up to Trump, I think there's more intersections between various communities now that we really do stand up for each other, along with our white allies, who we need. Absolutely need them. This is the coalition we need, the coalition of the good, against the MAGA coalition. So that's my story. It could go longer. You know, I've told it so much. I did a whole one-man show about it years ago in New York. But now I want to turn to something about politics here and what I find so infuriating since January 6th. And that is, in the years after 9/11, Republican politicians made the life of Muslim Americans a living hell. They demonized us. They lied. They said we want to impose Sharia law. Some of them said we knew who the terrorists were and we cheered on 9/11. That we were a Trojan horse, our community, just plotting to overtake this country. And yet some of these very same Republicans who did that are now defending the January 6th terrorists. And they are terrorists because the FBI has labeled January 6th as an act of domestic terrorism. And those involved in that attack are terrorists. That's how it goes. It's simple. 2 + 2 = 4 stuff. And when I talk about the hypocrisy of the GOP in general, this one's different. This is not run-of-the-mill politics. This is personal. This is personal for me, for my community, after what we've been through, after these same people have inspired hate crimes against us. And we've seen it from attacks on mosques, on people, women wearing hijabs, to, as I've written about, terrorist plots by right-wing actors to kill us in big numbers. And, you know, it's funny, it didn't start out this way, right after 9/11. And I do this just to be fair. Not that George W. Bush was great. He did other bad things afterwards. But after 9/11, the days after, he went to the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C., and met with Muslims, and the national media was there. And of 9/11, he said, these acts of violence against innocents violate the fundamental tenets of the Islamic faith. It's important for my fellow Americans to understand that. And then 2 weeks later, in a joint session of Congress with the nation and the world watching, Bush said this, and I want to play this clip, and it's really about tone. Yes, Bush was horrible into Iraq War, special registration, but tone from a president really is important. And I think it contributed to the fact that while we saw a spike in hate crimes shortly after 9/11, there was a lull for years after that. It was still higher than it should have been, but it didn't increase. Let's play clip number 1. This is from September 20th, 2001. George Bush, joint session of Congress, talking about the attacks. Clip 1, please.
I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful. And those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. The terrorists are traitors to their own faith, trying in effect to hijack Islam itself. The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It is not our many Arab friends. I ask you to uphold the values of America and remember why so many have come here. We're in a fight for our principles, and our first responsibility is to live by them. No one should be singled out for unfair treatment or unkind words because of their ethnic background or religious faith.
There's George Bush 2 weeks after the attack speaking to America. It's not to defend Bush and his policies. It's to just give you a sense of the tonal difference in the GOP. And there was a spike in hate crimes in that first year, and then it slid after that. Do you want to know when it began to go up again? 2010. Remember the Ground Zero Mosque, they called it? Supposed to be near the World Trade Center. Not exactly. I went down there. It was not next to the World Trade Center. You couldn't see the World Trade Center from it. But in any event, that in 2010 through 11 and 12 began the modern GOP anti-Muslim bigotry that we see today. They ginned up fear of Muslims. You had a whole industry created by some right-wing people to give speeches and write books about Islam, and we're going to attack you, and Fox News went berserk. You had Newt Gingrich running for president in 2012, literally saying that Muslims want to impose Islamic law, Sharia law in America. And then it got, the crescendo was in 2016 campaign, which began in 2015, as we all remember. You had Ben Carson say that a Muslim should not be president. And when he said that, he got a huge fundraising boost from GOP donors because they love that. Because they've been marinating in anti-Muslim bigotry for years. And Trump saw that. And Trump is the worst of the bunch by far. And he took it to new levels. He weaponized anti-Muslim bigotry. We actually saw, to give you some perspective, there were more hate crimes against Muslims in 2016, in that presidential election year, than in the year after 9/11. And that is because of Donald Trump. More assaults, more attacks on Muslim Americans because of Donald Trump's words than in the year after the attack on 9/11. And I want to play, and I know we never want to hear Trump, and I'm only going to play this one time here. It's a couple of clips together because to contrast that with George W. Bush. And I want you to hear, listen closely to this monster as he spews hate against the Muslim community for political gain. It's a few things cut together. And I play this because it makes my blood boil. And it reminds me of how horrible the GOP is as a party. And how soulless they are to elect that person as their nominee. And the fact that over 70 million Americans could vote for this monster makes you question everything about this nation. But here's clip number 2.
People that were cheering in the other side of New Jersey where you have large Arab populations, they were cheering as the World Trade Center came down. I know it might be not politically correct for you to talk about it, but there were people cheering as that building came down, as those buildings came down. And that tells you something. It was well covered at the time, George. Now, I know they don't like to talk about it, but it was well covered at the time. There were people over in New Jersey that were watching it, a heavy Arab population.
I want surveillance of these people. I want surveillance if we have to, and I don't care. Are you ready for this, folks? Are you ready? Oh, they're going to make it such a big deal. They're going to make it so big. He said something so politically incorrect. That's why we're going to hell, because we're so politically incorrect. Such a big deal. Such a big deal. I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay? If that's okay.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
I want you to replace the word Muslim with whatever else you are, whatever your faith is, whatever makes you different. And think about what it must be like to be a young Muslim American hearing that from the leading Republican, the man who becomes president and then gets 70 million votes. That monster, that vile bigot. And think about how painful that is. If he were saying that about blacks or Latinos or about LGBT or about Jews or any sect of Christianity or atheists, think about how painful that would have been. And that's what we went through. this monster, saying things like, and I'll read him, say that we knew who the terrorists were, but we were not turning them in. So this was already insulting and vile and despicable. But what we've seen after January 6th, to me, I can't even process intellectually. For what we're seeing, and I understand why, I still don't understand why there's not the outrage that I feel when we talk about this. That Donald Trump and other Republicans who made the lives of Muslims horrible in this country after 9/11, especially in the last 7 or 8 years, are now defending the January 6th terrorists. And the reasons are apparent. One were brown Muslims, and the other are white MAGA supporters. You know, we haven't heard Donald Trump after January 6th call for surveillance of MAGA events. He didn't demand his own supporters turn in the bad people like he did with Muslims. Instead, you know what he has said? He said, and I won't play any more clips, I'll just read. He's talked about the January 6th crowd as being peaceful people, great people, who fill the air with love. He tried to gaslight us, saying that January 6th was, quote, a love fest between the police and the people that walked down to the Capitol, as opposed to the reality of what we saw, with his supporters savagely beating the police. And Trump has even defended by name Ashley Babbitt over and over, a person who the Department of Justice notes was part of an angry mob and she was shot when, quote, she attempted to climb through one of the doors where glass was broken out into a secure area that led to elected officials. Trump has disgracefully called the police officer who shot her a murderer. He's literally called her a murderer just a few weeks ago. Despite the fact that Capitol Police have determined that shooting was justified because, quote, the actions of the officer in this case potentially saved members and staff members of Congress from serious injury or death. And Ashley Babbitt was there for one reason, because she tweeted about it. She was there for the QAnon storm, when Donald Trump was going to execute his political enemies, and he's defending her. Imagine the backlash the Muslim community would have felt if after any terrorist attack, we defended the terrorists, we defended the attackers. But that's what's happening now. And there's no outrage whatsoever. But Trump is not alone. There are other Republicans doing the same thing for political gain. Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, who, when President Obama was in office, slammed him for, quote, refusing to define the enemy for whom and what they are, radical Islamic terrorists. And on Paul Gosar's official congressional website, it's still up there. There's an image of his pledge to keep America safe from terrorism, and it's a picture of young Muslims who are refugees, and it has in big letters, the Trojan horse, warning that these people were, quote, the perfect opportunity for Islamic terrorists to sneak into the U.S. What is Gosar doing now? He is traveling the country calling these January 6 terrorists peaceful patriots. He's slamming law enforcement for, quote, harassing them. He's even claimed that Ashley Babbitt was executed, that's his word, by the Capitol Police officer who was lying in wait. Gosar just had a press conference in July with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz outside of the prison where some of the January 6 terrorists are being held, and called them political prisoners. Political prisoners. The terrorists who attacked us are political prisoners? And Marjorie Taylor Greene was there. This is the same Greene who in 2018, before she was in Congress, warned when Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar were elected to Congress. She warned it was part of, quote, an Islamic invasion of our government. But now she's openly defending an actual invasion of our capital by white MAGA terrorists. Others include Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, 2015, claiming that Muslims were going to infect themselves with Ebola during the outbreak and spread the disease as part of a terrorist attack. And he pledged in 2016 to keep America safe and defeat radical Islamic terrorism. What's he doing now? He's saying January 6th was not an insurrection. quote, by and large, it was a peaceful protest. You have the same people who made the life of my community a nightmare in the guise of fighting terrorism, now defending the terrorists. The GOP has gone from, after 9/11, of leading the so-called war on terror, to now defending the January 6th terrorists. And there seems to be no penalty in our society for this at all. That's why I say, I can't believe this is happening, because I never expected this. I thought with terrorism we would unite, and then the GOP and the leaders would have made it clear that Trump is not their leader, that the terrorists are all terrorists. They should be punished fully. Not this. Not that Donald Trump, the Osama bin Laden of January 6th, because Donald Trump is the Osama bin Laden of January 6th. That's not hyperbolic. This man radicalized his supporters for 2 months in front of us on national TV with lies about an election being stolen, about our democracy being taken from them and their voice being silenced. And he told them to come January 6th, and they did. And he told them at that rally that Joe Biden didn't win the election, and we're just not going to let that happen. His exact words, we're not, and he said that over and over, we can't let this happen. Then he said he's going with them to march down to Congress to stop the steal. He incited a terrorist attack. He walks free and the GOP defends him. And I think for a second, my God, what if Muslims did even a hint of any of this after any terrorist attack by a Muslim in this country? The backlash against our community, led by the Trumps of this nation, would have been things we have never seen. And we've seen this play out in real world terms, with hate crimes in 2016 and 17 as well, eclipsing those right after 9/11. We've seen bullying of Muslim students in schools by their peers and even their teachers during the time of Trump that we never saw before. And I don't have the words to say how vile this is and despicable. It makes you lose confidence in our system that Donald Trump can do what he did and walk free. Because every day Donald Trump walks free, our nation is less safe, because he is out there spewing the exact same lies that radicalized his supporters to attack our Capitol. It'd be one thing if he wasn't. He was just silent. He still should have been prosecuted for January 6th. But he's out there affirmatively spewing the lies to delegitimize our democracy and radicalize more people to be ready to attack us again. And for some reason, the man walks free. It's despicable. It's vile. It is unjust. And again, it's part of the world of being a minority in this country, where white people commit an act of terrorism while Muslims suffer hate crimes and discrimination because of people we've never met, that we have no connection to, but we share the same ethnicity in some cases or faith. White privilege is attacking our Capitol on January 6th, and your punishment is you get to go play golf and you're off Facebook for 2 years. That's the poster child for white entitlement and white privilege. So if you're wondering what white privilege is, look at Donald Trump. Because he was of color and did what he did, he's in prison now, without bail. No doubt, without bail. Because he's still a threat. He's a flight risk. He's still a threat. He's in prison now awaiting trial, if not dead. So when I look back 20 years from 9/11 to now, my life has changed in ways I never expected. Now, in some ways for the better, in that I am proud to be a minority. I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with my fellow minorities, whatever that minority might be. Doesn't matter your skin color. If you're white in the LGBTQ community, you're a minority. If you're an atheist, you're a minority. If you're black, Latino, Asian, that we're all in this together. And then when I step back politically and you see our country after 9/11 and you see now after January 6th, the GOP went from leading the war on terror to to defending the January 6 terrorists, I have no words for where we are. You don't have to read any history book to understand this is not a good place for our nation. And that Donald Trump has to be prosecuted for the good of this nation. So that's my reflections on 20 years. We have different people on later in the show. Linda Sarsour is going to join us and doing a very special episode of What Just Happened. But I'll look back for 20 years, and Maysoon Zayed and Nitha Khan are going to join us for that. But we have plenty of time. We have time for calls like 7:15-ish, 7:20. When you reflect back on 9/11, what do you think happened? How has our country changed? Is there any good things? I'm fine. I mean, I'm just sharing my reality. You know, for those who lost loved ones on 9/11, it is still painful. I watch interviews today, and I understand that firsthand. My father died 22 years ago. It's still painful to this day. So for those families, they're suffering still the loss of a family member who was killed by this horrific terrorist attack. And I'm sure they go through their mind and think about that family member being there for them during milestones and events, and they miss them. For others, they went into war in Iraq instead of attacking the actual people who waged the war, or Afghanistan as well. And some have lost loved ones, and the repercussions of that still are playing out right in front of us. But how has America changed in your view in 20 years? Is there any good things? Are there any bad things? What stands out for you in these last 20 years about our nation? Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be political. It could be just personal. How you view the country differently. How you view minorities differently. How you look at January 6th differently because of 9/11. And are there lessons that we've learned for the better? Because I'm grappling for them. You know, I'm not going to be trite and say that 9/11 terrorists won. They didn't win. We won militarily. But if their goal was, as George Bush told us, to destroy our democracy, hated us for our democracy, I'm not being trite either when I say the GOP is now doing the work of the 9/11 terrorists in dismantling our democracy. They're doing it right in front of us. They, like some of these right-wing terrorists, are imposing their extreme religious beliefs to oppress women. So I think the fight continues. So I don't think the 9/11 terrorists have won, but I do think our democracy, if that was their goal to destabilize it, well, I think unconnected to them, that's happened now because of the GOP.